Okay, shall we get started?
Yeah.
Excellent. So hi, I'm your host today. My name is Jen Mankoff. I'm wearing a green dress and a striped green and white shirt. And I have short gray black hair. I use she, her pronouns. And I am the director of the Center for Research and Education in Accessible Technology and Experiences, which we call CREATE. I'm also a person with a disability and a mentor and a parent to people with disabilities and a disability advocate and activist. So I wear many hats. And I'm really pleased today to introduce someone that I think many of you already know, Josh Mealy. He is a blind scientist, engineer, designer, director of the Center for Accessibility and Open Source, CHAOSS, Amazon's principal accessibility researcher, a 2021 MacArthur Genius Award winner, activist, advocate, father, and leader, and has also been a mentor to me. So thank you for joining us, Josh.
It is such a pleasure. Thanks, Jen.
So this is kind of an open conversation, but I prepared some things to ask about, but you're welcome to jump in or redirect us. I want to start by talking about your origin story. What got you interested in science and engineering?
I don't know. So I have always been a very curious, very break it kind of guy. My whole life I've been sort of fascinated by things that work, by machines, by how things get put together, how to take things apart. And I think that that's just part of my, I think, some people are like that and some people aren't. And I think part of it is, there's a family cultural component, maybe there's a genetic component, who knows. I do come from a long line of architects and designers. I have a bunch of architects in my, my uncles and cousins, and my father and grandfather were all architects. My grandmother, both of my grandmothers were clothing designers, and I think it goes even further back than that, but I don't know. My mother was an artist, and so there's a lot of sort of creativity and sort of how to make things that I was exposed to as a young kid. And then I have this theory that people with disabilities, and I don't think it's just my theory, I think many of us have sort of twigged to this, but disability is the true mother of invention. And if you are a person with a disability who does not tinker and figure out how to get access to the things that you want to do, you're going to be at a significant disadvantage in doing those things, because most of the time, either nobody has figured out how to do it, or nobody has published how to do it, or you didn't have time to look for how to do it, or some linear combination of those things. And so invention and creativity around accessibility, I think, is a fundamental part of the disability experience. And I discovered that very early on without articulating it in anything like those terms until much later. But I've known, I think that is what has made me and kept me a maker, a tinkerer, a breaker, and builder of things.
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying about the necessity of innovating as a person with a disability. And I also resonate with your story about your parents, because actually, as a computer scientist, I often say that my first exposure to programming was my mom using her punch card-based knitting machine.
That's so cool.
It really is. And I think those early exposures at least lay the groundwork, right, for it. Like they create the sort of welcome mat for us to then become innovators, whether it's, you tell stories in your book about, Klaus showing you how radio waves worked with a rope, for example, that I just think can't help but encourage that way of thinking and the scientific mindset that comes with it.
Yeah. Klaus being my stepfather, who is a geophysicist and professor at Columbia, who is still, even into his 90s, an innovator in his field, working not in geophysics anymore, but in urban disaster planning and preparedness and standards. So
a space where we badly need good disability representation.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Something that struck me about your stories about those early years was how many people really believed in you and sort of expected you to believe in yourself, whether it was the possibility that you would become the president of the United States or your woodworking teacher just saying, don't cut your hand off, but let's use these tools. And I love, it's such an important mindset that not to just posture about access or about the importance of being able to do all the same things as anyone else, but just really believing in it and giving you that, I think. I don't know.
And trying to do it. I think there's so much about the expectations that we have of ourselves and of others are so much more important than we usually recognize. The beliefs and the beliefs about what we can and can't do, and to have mentors, teachers, parents, friends, and others surrounding you who don't have low expectations is such a lucky break for a person with a disability. And I didn't realize how lucky I was until much later in life. The families that we have set the tone for the kind of capabilities we build. And sometimes we are able to succeed despite low expectations. Like, people around us have low expectations and we're like, F you, I can do better than that, and I will. But that requires an enormous amount of tenacity and grit, and so some people can even overcome low expectations. And I just super privileged. I'm super privileged in that I was born white, middle class, male, and the blind part was the part where where the low expectations would have been applied, but luckily were not.
Yeah.
And so I just grew up believing that I could, yeah. and was able to prove to myself again and again that I could. And so when people did come along and say, for example, there's a story in my book about another person in the academy who was in, I think he was like a physical chemist or something like that. And he said when he found out that I wanted to be a physicist, when I wanted to major in physics, he said, "Oh, you couldn't be a physicist. Physicists have to be able to write on blackboards." Huh. And I knew enough to say, "Nah, I don't." First of all, I knew he was kind of a jackass anyway, so I knew there was a problem. But I also knew that he had to be wrong about that, because I was able to do, I could do math in Braille, I could work physics problems in Braille. If I needed to write on a blackboard, like, I could tell somebody else what to write. Like, I didn't need to be able to write on a blackboard. And so often these kinds of expectations, these kinds of sort of presumptions about what somebody, what the technical aspects of what something entails are seen as barriers, when in fact the thing itself, being a physicist, wasn't a barrier. It's the tools this guy perceived as being the barrier. And if you can work your way around the tools, then you're good. And just you always have to remember that tools are almost never designed for us. You almost always have to reinvent the tools.
Which brings us back to invention, right? Like that is core to how we function in the world as people with disabilities. And it's the knowledge and the expertise that you bring to these tasks that matters much more than exactly what tool you use. Not to mention that I would guess very few physicists today use blackboards. Maybe they use whiteboards.
Yeah, I don't think it's part. I bet they don't even use whiteboards anymore.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, so true. I also love how another thing that I think besides low expectations that we often face as people with disabilities is this idea that people have to keep us safe. And that's clearly not how your family raised you.
No,
in the best way possible.
As a child of the 70s, I was not kept safe. Nobody was kept safe. And you know, in the sense of whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, it certainly did. But it could have killed me. And luckily for me, it didn't. There are many alternate universes where I'm not here. I promise you that. But as a, you know, one of the things that I see parents of blind kids doing that one of the reasons why I wrote this book is because I want parents of blind kids to read this. I want teachers of blind kids to read this. I want blind kids to read this, and blind adults of sighted kids to, I want everybody to read it, obviously, but for the adults that have influence over the lives of young blind people, I really want them to read this, because saying no you can't, or be careful, or watch out, or keep your hands to yourself, or look with your eyes, not with your hands, like these are all things that blind kids hear so much of. And the need to explore, the need to play, the need to get your hands literally dirty is critical for learning about the world. And if you're afraid to touch because parents say don't touch, or oh, you look so blind when you feel everything, or any of the awful things, people get their hands slapped for touch. It's just like, it can be terrible, right? And the ability, but we do have to touch a lot of things. And part of when I am handed something, I feel it everywhere. I touch every part of it. I want to know what it is, like, unless I already know what it is. But like when I'm checking out something new, Jen earlier gave me a tactile map embroidered onto a piece of fabric, which was really cool. And when somebody hands me something like that, I feel everything. I feel it all over. And I've met blind kids that when you hand them something, they just sort of hold it. And it's like, no, man, that's not the path to success. And so God, I can't even remember what you asked me. But
safety.
Yeah,
we were talking about
safety. Yeah, and then there's lots of stuff about drugs, lots of stuff about getting in trouble with the constabulary.
Definitely some white male privilege there,
yeah,
but yes.
For sure.
So actually, I mean, that particular story of the way that you would climb street signs, for example, and just all of the, I don't know, I was reading your book and I saw that you mentioned rage several times, right? You mentioned irreconcilable rage when somebody treated you like a monster, the infuriation at the barriers you ran into at Berkeley. I mean, one passage you say, the more I learned, the more I found my ire growing on behalf of all disabled people, no matter their particular struggle, because of how we had to do ridiculous things like make nighttime guerrilla attacks against innocent curbs with asphalt and sledgehammers just so we could live our lives. And this is so pertinent today, right? Just yesterday, I think ADAPT protesters were arrested trying to stop Medicaid budget cuts. The Talking Book and Braille Library here in Washington State faces budget cuts that are likely to close its doors. And this results in children not being able to have access to the learning and the exploration that we want for them, people being denied all sorts of services and jobs and opportunities to live their best lives. But you also point out that being disabled, you eventually learn that, this is a quote again, that advocacy will never be enough on its own. We have to learn to be advocates, but also leaders and activists. And I was wondering, how do you express both your anger and your activism today?
Well, the older you get, and the more sort of connections you build, I wish I could dredge up the Ursula Le Guin quote that I want right now, but basically, the longer you live and the more you do, the fewer choices you have. And so you always have to sort of be like I am no longer I have kids, I have responsibilities, I'm no longer out there, chaining myself to inaccessible buses. But there are other ways where we can express our rage and dissatisfaction with what's happening. And it's really interesting because right now we are in a situation where everyone is under attack. All of our rights are being are in jeopardy. And as disabled people, we are often the first to go. And so we have to be super aware of that, and ADAPT is amazing. I have always admired them, and I think we should all be sort of thinking about what it is we need to do from our particular social contexts, what we are able to do. I'm not ready to get arrested right now, but it may come to it depending on what all happens. And there is rage, the rage of people denying the humanity of people with disabilities. It's a lot of, and there's this other balancing act that we have to do, because there's this stereotype of the angry blind man or the angry disabled person. Oh, he's so bitter because he's blind. That's why he's angry. In fact, I'm super proud of being blind. I live a really nice blind life, but I do feel rage. And the rage that I feel is not because I'm blind, it's because of the way the world occasionally, fairly regularly, denies my ability to be an equal participant, and feels okay about that denial because it's either it's too much trouble, or it's not worth it to them, or it doesn't fit with the business model, or it just doesn't matter because you're blind, because you're just blind. Like we're trying to serve the public, not blind people, right? So the anger that I feel is about the ableism that we still have to dismantle in society, in the institutions that we have. But you have to just, you can't get things done by being cranky all the time. You got to know when to be cranky, and you got to know when to be nice, and you've got to know when to be a huge pain in the ass. And that's knowing when to do what is, that's the wisdom that we all need to build, that I have, I think, gotten better at over the years.
Yeah. I mean, yes, and I think you've been doing it for a long time. I mean, your work on mapping early on is a great example, I think, of maybe a fourth category of like, let's go and do the thing that is missing, show what it's like to do it right. So let's put maps together, let's crowdsource, let's do whatever we need. And to me, that is also activism, right? It is a way of changing the world.
Right. And so the maps are a great example. There are things that I've done that sort of pissed people off. The maps aren't one of them. And the maps, so when I started building technology to make tactile street maps more available, more accessible. The dominant wisdom in the scientific community was that blind people could not use tactile maps to build cognitive mental models of spaces. And they built this idea on experimental psychology results from the 60s and 50s, where blindfolded sighted undergraduates had all their fingers but one taped down, and they were expected to feel around on a map and then reproduce spatial results.
Sighted.
And blindfolded sighted undergraduates, not an analog for blind people. And blind people don't feel things with one finger. It's just not the way things are done. So they had these, there was this body of literature that basically said, don't bother with tactile maps, blind people won't benefit from them. So I and a number of other tactile maps researchers like Simon Ungar in the late 90s, early aughts were kind of trying to produce the data to show that this was nonsense. I knew that it was nonsense because I used maps, I benefited from maps, and I knew I wasn't the only one. But it was a chicken and egg problem. There were very few tactile maps available for blind people to learn how to use maps. And so because so few blind people knew how to use maps, when you showed a blind person a tactile map, they would often not benefit from it because they didn't know how to use it. And there's another aspect to it where, because tactile maps were so poorly understood, the requirements were so poorly understood, there was an enormous body of really bad tactile maps out there. So when someone who didn't have experience with tactile maps saw a bad tactile map and didn't benefit from it, the false thesis was again proved. So to break that cycle, I created a piece of software that would create tactile maps from geographical data, tactile street maps, and I used a sort of an algorithmic approach to that usually led to pretty good readable results. And my plan was just to don't worry about the literature as much, don't worry about standards, don't worry about creating a new like tactile maps set of guidelines. Just start making a shit ton of tactile maps that people could use and benefit from, and allow people to make tactile maps of the things that they needed and wanted. And it did. It broke the cycle. It's one of the things that I think it's probably the most effective thing I ever did, was because now, and I'm not the only person who did it, because there are lots of other people who, in the same time frame between 2005 and the present, were also working as tactile graphics and tactile maps advocates. And but now we have people like Chancey Fleet teaching, hundreds of people how to do tactile drawings, how to design tactile maps. We have the team at the San Francisco Lighthouse who routinely provide tactile maps as part of orientation mobility lessons and other, we have places like Disney asking, contracting to get tactile maps for their parks. So we're in a different landscape now around tactile maps, and I am super pleased with the role I've played in that.
Translating the work that we do to the point where it really is adopted that deeply is, I think, a sign both of how meaningful the approach was, but also an ability to build community and a commitment to getting things out there. And I think it's a challenge often when we are in the ivory tower to do that. So I'm curious, I noticed one theme in that is use of citizen science. Another was that you kind of went to the places where people were, you brought your innovations, you printed things for people, you put it in people's hands. Do you have any lessons to offer about how to do that effectively, how to build those communities and that translation pathway?
Whenever I had a project that I thought was worth doing, it was always something that I thought would benefit people. And so I always looked for communities that were aligned with what I wanted to do. And I always made things, I always tried to make my prototypes be sort of secretly ready to be used. And that's why software is such a nice, software or like open source hardware is so nice to work in, because if you're trying to build like specialized devices, manufacturing them and getting them into people's hands is really hard. But when you're doing cool things with software or with web apps or whatever, it's really easy to get it into people's hands. So I think I don't know if I have any. I mean, because you already kind of you and your team, the Create folks. That's already your paradigm, I think. For the most part, the things that you do are things that are already going to be of benefit to people. You're not sort of doing some, like I'll get calls or emails from professors or student teams. They're like, oh, we think we might want to do this, and it's like, okay, who told you that might be a good idea? Like what blind people have you been talking to who said that was something we needed? And they're like, oh, well, we just kind of thought it might be good, And so they're just working at this incredible disadvantage because they don't have blind people to say, hey, you should work on this. This is what you need. This is what we need. And if you work on this, then I can help you connect to a community of 500 blind people that really want that. Yeah. It's what the tech bros call pushing string. If you don't have that kind of a situation to feed into. The other thing that I always recommend is when you have a grant-driven project, if you've got a thing that you think is going to be cool, find your tech transfer means like a commercial partner. So find your tech transfer partner before you do anything, so that as you do the things, they can say, oh, no, don't do it that way. We won't, like our customers won't want that. Because if you build a prototype and then you try to find the tech transfer partner afterwards, you may have made a number of design decisions that will really inhibit your ability to get it out there.
So what I'm hearing is bring people in early so you're building the right thing, make sure it's deployable from the start, and have a partner to transfer it to whenever you're ready to get it out there.
Why didn't I just say that?
I like that list. We're almost at the end, I think, of our time. So I'm saying this now just because I want the audience to queue up some questions, jump into the conversation. But I wanted to end on a topic that we touched on in our conversation just earlier this week, Josh. To me, part of connecting to disability culture means embracing values like joy and creativity that move beyond deficit models of access. And I was curious, how this shows up in your work. Would you connect it to any of the things you do with like the Blind Arduino blog, or art, or like where does it show up? I'm just curious.
All of the things that I've ever worked on are things that I thought were really interesting and cool. They were things that I wanted to work on. My separation of work and play is there's a lot of overlap, and I love making new things. I love building things and having other people tell me how cool they are. Like, that's really satisfying to me.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of that applies in the accessibility work I do. I want to make cool things, and I want other people to tell me how cool they are. So in order to have that be a reality, I have to make sure that they are the things that people will think are cool. So I, as a researcher, I do a lot of connecting to people who aren't me, blind people with different experiences. You know, the book is called Connecting Dots, A Blind Life. That's the subtitle, is A Blind Life. And
I'm holding it up. And we have a table full of them too.
there are as many ways to be blind as there are blind people. My way of doing it is just one way, one privileged, white, burned, blind way of doing it. And I am constantly trying to connect with other blind experiences to understand how the work that I do can be beneficial to those who are living different kinds of blind experiences from my own. And I think that that's a really crucial thing. But I also, for the tactile maps, I just love maps. I find so much joy in exploring new tactile maps and developing new kinds of tactile maps. One of the things that I spent a lot of time a couple of years ago designing and creating a little 1-inch diameter tactile globe made of bronze that is just water and land. It's just two there's the lower parts are water, the higher parts are land. There's no mountains, there's no no sea trenches. It's all just water and land, and it's like it just shows the continental outlines and the South Pacific Islands, and it's beautiful. And that kind of thing, and sort of realizing how there's beauty and joy in designing new ways of representing information, in bringing people new ways of perceiving information that they hadn't thought of before, that they hadn't played with before, and just the fun of figuring out how to do new things.
Yeah.
That's what I draw pleasure from.
I love it. I wish I could just keep asking you questions for the next hour or two, but I want to give the audience a chance to jump in. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Jen. It's so lovely to talk about this with you. How do we do this? Jen, you should call on people.
Sure. If folks could raise your hand or somehow indicate that you want to talk, that would be great. We'll give people a moment. I see a hand in the back right. That's you.
Hey Josh, Terrell Thompson.
Hey.
Just wondering what the biggest problems are right now from your perspective for blind people that you think technology can solve?
Non-political problems.
Yeah.
So tactile graphics, going back to tactile maps and graphics, are very different from just visual graphics that you can feel. You don't just take a photograph and make it feelable and expect it to be relevant, expect it to communicate anything like the original visual representation. And so creating tactile graphics that are meaningful and especially, whether they're infographics or charts and graphs or maps or cartoons or photographs or fine art or whatever the image may be. We as blind people live in a world where spatial information is very difficult to get access to. And I think that we're already seeing, you know, AI and large language models being brought to bear on image descriptions, such as, you know, with Be My Eyes and other people that are doing similar things. I think that we may, what I really want to see more of is creating, using AI to render appropriate, well-designed, meaningful tactile graphics from unstructured, or you know, from unvectored visual representations. And I think that doing it as I've often done before, but which required a lot of sort of bespoke design. There's a mode of presentation, audio tactile graphics, where you can touch a tactile and be able to also get specific information from an interactive computer-driven system about what you're touching, whether it would be presented in Braille or audio or sound or other mechanisms. And those kinds of representations, I think we're getting to a place where we can really expect to use AI to present things in that audio tactile mode, or just tactile, much more without a lot of human intervention. And that's going to really improve things like STEM accessibility, education for STEM, and for scientists who need immediate access to good data representations.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for coming. Anybody else?
Go ahead.
Josh, it's Eve, Eve Suskind. You asked the other questioner if he was speaking about non-political problems, biggest non-political problems. I'm curious what you think the biggest political problems are for blind people, specifically disabled people in general. I mean, you spoke in sort of general terms about it, but I wonder if there are any like specific things that we should be paying attention to.
I think I have long been a fairly apolitical person. My joy comes from designing cool technologies for blind people, and I figured I would let the rest of the world deal with the politics. And I think I can, you know, that is no longer a place I feel comfortable occupying. But I'm also really new to thinking about what we can do to be politically active and effective. So I don't have the answers, but I do know that we as blind people, as people with disabilities, we are in the process, along with everyone else, of having our rights eroded and revoked. We are in the midst of the biggest regression we've ever experienced in terms of what our rights and capabilities are as people with disabilities. We've been making a lot of progress with 504 and with the ADA and with the CVAA. These are all, you know, pieces of policy and legislation that give us, as people with disabilities, the right to do various things, and requiring various accessibility accommodations for products and services and organizations. And those are all being rolled. Those are all under threat at this time. What to do about it, I don't know. But complacence is not going to get us the answer. We cannot lie low and hope that it's going to end soon. We have to stand up. We have to be actively opposing the regression of our rights and ability to be people with disabilities in the world who don't have to apologize for our existence. So that's all I got for you right now. But there are other people who are thinking about this much more specifically, and they're talking. They are being loudly vocal on the web. You can find them if you look for them, and that's my best offer.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Yes. My name is Marcella. Thank you very much, by the way. This has been so great. I'm an instructional designer, and I work for kind of early childhood education. And recently we had a situation where a content developer was kind of fighting me on a few things that, I just kept saying, we can't do that, it's inaccessible. We can't do that, it's inaccessible. And people have the notion that if it's just boring, because people want to make things fun and exciting, and let's select here and play there. And this woman suddenly just said, well, Marcella, we can't make the course boring to fit the few and not the many. And I thought, what? I said, I'm sorry, what? What do you mean by that? And she said, Marcella, these are early childhood educators. And, what, do you really think that there are, she said it just like this, do you really think there are many blind childhood educators? How are they supposed to take care of the children? And I thought, okay, well, first I've just lost major respect for you. Nothing of what you say is really going to be meaningful for me. And second, I'm thinking, and partially, I think she is kind of right in the sense that a lot of people don't pursue certain jobs because they think that there is not another way to do it, right?
Yeah.
So what advice would you give? That's one question. And then my second comment is, because of that, we made greater steps to make the course accessible. So we thought even further, like how can we reduce the amount of content that people are taking and all kinds of things. So do you think that we are actually doing a good job at courses online, and what can we do aside from what we already know or have been doing?
Those are great questions, and of course very few people have the energy to fight their entire lives. So we often make choices about careers and educational paths that aren't exactly what we want to do, but will be more realistic for us. So, the blind early childhood educators are facing not that person, but people with those attitudes in their primary education, in their college education, in their graduate educations, and in their job interviews. So your friend or your colleague is kind of right. There aren't going to be that many early childhood development educators, or whatever the right term is. My apologies. But it reminds me of the shopkeeper who says, why should I make my store accessible? I've never seen a person in a wheelchair in here, but there's a step at the door, right? So it's like, of course there aren't that many. We've got to look at it holistically, and that's a big societal challenge. And just as we are still, it's not mission accomplished on sexism or racism or ableism, or any of the other, isms you might care to name. Those are all still in flight. We're making progress. There are ups and downs. We're mostly probably still going in the right direction in reducing the various isms. But it's a long game. And so the other part of your question about are we doing a good job? I don't want to be, so let me put it in an encouraging way. We are very often, when we make something accessible, when we are challenged to make an experience accessible, we often say, I don't know, what does WCAG say? I don't know, what do the Web Accessibility Guidelines say? How can I use, ARIA to make this more accessible? And what we wind up doing is taking a visual interface, a visual experience, an experience that's intended to be clicked and dragged and looked at with the sparkles and the visual joy that is designed in, and we try to figure out how can we make this work with a screen reader. And what we do is we build an interface to an interface. We build a non-visual interface, not to the fundamental experience, but to the visual interface. So it's layers deep, and it sucks. And so my encouragement is to say, when faced with building something, making something accessible that looks like it's gonna be really boring to make accessible or really hard to make accessible, remember that what you're trying to do is not make the current interface accessible. You're trying to make the fundamental experience accessible. You're trying, let's say you've got a physics model of heat and friction, and you've got this beautiful visual thing of rubbing two sticks together, and you see the molecules dancing faster and faster on the screen. What could you do, not to make that a screen reader experience, but what could you do that would add speech and sonification to the experience so that it's the joy and fun and cleverness of it work whether you're looking at it or interacting with the alternative interface. Make the design an accessible experience, not an accessible screen reader experience. And I think very often when we come across sort of crappy accessible experiences, especially in education, that's the problem.
Thank you.
Very useful.
Hi, this is Kate. I just remember in the past you talked about this philosophy with Amazon and sort of voice experiences in Alexa. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Let's see. I'm not totally clear on there. That's a big field. Can you narrow it down for me?
Well, just I think that the building sort of with the audio first in mind.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so, there's lots of voice assistants out there these days. Amazon has Alexa, there's, the Google Assistant, there's Siri, there's a bunch more probably coming. And we as, Alexa when Alexa first came out was so amazing because it was this voice first experience that didn't have screens or visuals, and was so, it wasn't designed for blind people, but blind people adopted it like crazy because it was so useful and so accessible for us. And I think it's a great example of kind of, we talk about curb cuts in accessibility, where you design something for a disabled population, and then it turns out to be amazing for everybody, right? Curb cuts are great for folks using wheelchairs and scooters, but it also turns out to be good for people with grocery carts and skateboards and bikes, right? So that's a curb cut. I like to remind people that there are tuck brucks also, curb cut spelled backwards, which is when you design something for a mainstream audience, but it turns out you've done it in an incredibly accessible way, and it turns out that people with disabilities of one type or another adopt it disproportionately. In fact, Amazon, there's a great example of a thing we did with Amazon where we made a talking sorry, not a talking, but an Alexa-enabled microwave oven, right? And so you could tell Alexa, like, set the oven for 2 minutes. You could do, and we realized that a lot of blind people were buying this microwave oven. So we thought, it's too bad the microwave oven, just like most microwaves, doesn't have any tactile markings on the buttons. So we made a sticky, a big sticker that was the size and shape of the keypad that we bundled with the microwave if you wanted it for free. And people started, so that people could not only, talk to their microwaves, but they could add this well-designed, well-integrated, accessible sticker that would mark all of the buttons in Braille and tactiles on the microwave. And blind people actually wound up being a significant factor in the star rating on that product. So it's like these things that, we think of accessibility we often think of accessibility as a separate factor, like we design tools and then we think about accessibility. If we do it right, then we're designing accessible tools from the beginning that everybody can use and that people with disabilities can be, can not only enjoy, but can have a significant benefit for them. One of the things that I like to talk about, again, about sort of the Amazon framework of disability is that there are products and services that are useful for everyone, but which are really uniquely transformative for some people. Online shopping, if it's accessible, is great for everybody, but it's really useful if you can't make it to the brick and mortar store, or if you, whether for transportation or for browsing, product categories or whatever. And so, blind people and people who use wheelchairs find online shopping super useful for them, more so than many other people. But everybody likes online shopping. So enough about Amazon.
Thank you.
On that note, we are at the end of our hour, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time and also our interpreters, who I want to just quickly say thank you to.
Thank you.
So thanks, Josh. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jen.